wonderful day and a wonderful week so far. Today, as you can see from the title, I'm going to be reading to you guys. I find reading, when someone reads to me, so relaxing, and I think that can be connected to childhood memories of people reading me to sleep. I find like a quiet, whispery reading voice to be so tingle-inducing. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. The book I'm going to be reading, it does have significance. It's called Touch by Tiffany Field. And the reason I chose this specific book is because personally, and tell me if you disagree, I think that touch is one of the most important and vital senses that human beings possess. And the reason being is because if you receive a really good hug or someone holds your hand, chemicals are released like dopamine and serotonin that make you happier. So basically, when you get a hug, you become happier. And ASMR, to an extent, induces some of those feelings from touch, even though in real life you're actually being hugged, or you're being booped on the nose, or someone's doing your makeup. But ASMR it's through a camera, and its touch is simulated, which I think is just as important and it's just as helpful because it can help people so much, and it can fill that void if someone isn't receiving that type of human contact as much as they should be. So when I touch your face, it can be very helpful. And so I'm just going to be reading a few chapters. Well, one chapter. I'm going to be reading one chapter. And I don't want this video to go over half an hour because it's a bit too long. But we're going to try our best to finish. So, Touch by Tiffany Field. And this is nonfiction. Just a bit of a disclaimer to my fiction lovers out there. That's me. But I really like this book, and I'm actually currently using it for a project that I'm doing about ASMR. And I'm going to be delivering a talk, and I'm pretty sure I discussed that in one of my descriptions in a video. But this book is going to be used in a research paper and possibly referenced during my talk. So I'm just really excited to read this to you guys. I think it's so informative about the importance of human touch and around the taboo of it. And it is a little bit dark, a little bit depressing at times. So this may be just a more relaxing video in contrast to a video that you want to go to sleep to. Okay. The first chapter is called Touch Hunger. Tana was raised in a Romanian orphanage. At age 7, relief workers found her all skin and bones and only half the height of a normal child her age. As with the many other children in the orphanage, her plight made the relief workers feel they were witnessing a cruel joke being played on those little survivors. Because there were so many children and the orphanage was so severely understaffed, Tana and the others had spent most of their time in cribs and had been touched and held only during infrequent caregiving activities. Barely able to walk on their stick-like legs, the children stared at the recently arrived massage therapist and winced at their touch. But after many months of regular nutrition and massage therapy, Tana, like the others who received the same treatment, was no longer a gaunt little skeleton, and her legs were strong enough for her to run without her toppling over. The experience of Tana and the other Romanian orphans reinforces the critical importance of touch for growth and development during and after World War II. Similarly, orphaned infants and children in overcrowded institutions were only rarely and briefly touched by nurses. Without being affectionately held, hugged, and stroked, many of these infants died. The taboos against touch. Amazingly, at the same time that American television viewers were cringing at the sight of Romanian orphans, American teachers were being instructed not to touch their students for fear of sexual abuse lawsuits. Teachers now are no longer allowed to hug grade schoolers if they do well in class, or pick up preschoolers when they fall on the playground. Even in our own University model preschool, we found that teachers were touching the 1-year-olds less than 12% of the time. Schools have implemented several hundred child abuse prevention programs costing millions of dollars, and millions of young children have participated in these programs. Typically, the programs give lessons on recognizing different kinds of touch, from good to bad, telling the children how to say no and how to get away, teaching which body parts are private, and teaching that any touch that does not feel good is a bad touch. Although everyone agrees it is important for children to be educated about good touch, bad touch, or appropriate and inappropriate touch, it is depressing to see a 3-year-old child wiggling free from a hugging teacher, saying, "Don't touch me, don't touch me, my mommy told me teachers can't touch me." In the United States, National Public Radio included a special program in their daily morning edition newscast titled "Daycare Center Goes to Extremes to Protect Reputation." The story described how a daycare center constrained its staff from touching children. The director of the daycare said, "It's against our policy to pick up the kids. It's against our policy to hold them on our lap. The no-touch policy is more to protect the center than the children. It would be too easy for one innocent hug or a playful piggyback ride to be misinterpreted." Other no-touch procedures, including installing video cameras in classrooms and holding in-service sessions on good, bad touch for teachers, telling them how they can appropriately hold children on their lap. When asked at one of these sessions how they think they can touch children, teachers themselves gave the following examples: holding hands, arm around shoulder, hugging, patting on the back, holding hands on field trips, holding the children during separations from parents, cuddling when they're upset, giving first aid, giving arrival and departure hugs and high fives, dressing, feeding, toileting the children, patting their heads in recognition or praise, touching them for behavior or safety management, and removing any child who poses danger to others. All these are considered acceptable forms of touch. Other directives include never touching private parts, those a bathing suit would cover, always hugging from the side, avoiding frontal hugs, and never being alone with a child. Men are not allowed to change diapers, so men are not hired as daycare teachers. All daycare workers are fingerprinted and checked for criminal records. Yet, despite all these mandates, child abuse by daycare workers is on the increase. A recent Oprah Winfrey show focused on the issue of teachers touching children. The president of the National Education Association said, "Our slogan is, teach, don't touch." One of the teachers on the show taught music. In the green room before the show, she told me that of course she had to touch children, as for example when she taught them the violin. But on the air she said, "In my classroom, we hug with our eyes." Oprah Winfrey walked over and said, "Did you get that hug I just sent you?" Sexual abuse is relatively rare in U.S. schools. As little as 1% of all reported sexual abuse cases involving children occur in schools, whereas 90% of abusive incidents involve parents and relatives. Nonetheless, school directors are spending more money on liability than on teacher salaries, and an increasing number of caregivers are leaving the child care profession. This is a significant problem because 50% of working women who are new mothers are back at work before their infant is 1 year old, and 60% of women with preschool children are working mothers. The Bureau of Labor estimated that in the year 2000, women accounted for approximately 2/3 of the expected new workers. Their children entered a daycare system where teachers were mandated not to touch the children. Despite the infrequency of sexual abuse cases in schools, schools have become a primary target for anti-touch laws. More and more states are making it illegal for teachers to touch students, and even in those states that have outlawed touch in schools, it is increasingly risky for teachers to touch students. Similarly, codes of ethics forbid touching by psychotherapists and counselors. Can you imagine a therapist counseling a hospice patient without being able to touch him or her? These laws are just made to protect the child and the psychotherapy patient. They also benefit the insurance business. Laws regarding touch exist for students as well as teachers. Behaviors once considered mere teasing are now reclassified as sexual harassment. And although the law do not require schools to teach about sexual harassment, children as young as 6 can be held legally responsible for it. In September 1996, 6-year-old Jonathan Previtt, a first grader at school at Southwest Elementary in Lexington, North Carolina, was accused of sexual harassment by a school official and barred from class for a day. Jonathan's sexual harassment had consisted of planting a kiss on a schoolmate's cheek. His parents were offered $100,000 for the movie rights, which they declined. At school, teenagers also suffer the loss of touch from adults when they are deprived of their coach's affectionate hugs and rub-downs for cold muscles. That may be the reason more teachers are seen hugging their peers in school halls, grabbing whatever they can get as they pass from classroom to classroom. It may also be why sexual I can't pronounce that. You get what I mean. And teenage pregnancy are on the increase, and could even explain the increasing incidence of eating disorders and addictive behaviors. Meanwhile, although no-touch mandates are intended to decrease child abuse and sex abuse, negative forms of touch have increased in discipline in local parentis. The teacher's right to spank the child has not yet disappeared in all states. No-touch mandates do not seem to make those negative behaviors go away, as is evidenced by increasingly frequent reports of child abuse in the press. The critical importance of touch. Bumper stickers to ask, "Have you hugged your child today?" are disappearing as parents become wary of touching their own children. This behavior, reminiscent of an earlier, more formal time, is not a good idea, because children need touch for survival. Their growth and development thrive on touch. And how will they learn about love and affection if not through touch? There are other fortunate societies where touch and familial bonding still exist. Studies in Uganda show that babies carried in upright positions are quicker to walk and faster to develop in other areas as well. This upright position heightens the baby's visual alertness while it helps develop their back and neck muscles. Carried around all day, these Ugandan babies become familiar with the world as they view it from their secure vantage point. Because they are held close and upright, they stay calmer. Studies show they even cry less than babies who are not carried regularly. This closeness is also evident in numerous other countries, including India, where the whole family sleeps on large palm mats on the floor or on several cots in one small room, and Japan, where Japanese infants share their parents' futons. In all of these countries, massage is also used as a familial, nurturant routine. Massages are likely to nurture the parents as much as or more than the infant, but in some places, some parents are afraid of their children's young, vulnerable bodies. Other parents are afraid to touch their children because they feel that their natural, sensual desire to touch their offspring may be construed as sexual. But often, massaging their infants help both mother and father feel closer to their children in ways they otherwise could not. Massaging also allows parents to know their child's body better and imparts the message to the child that touch is good. I just want to make a comment that this attitude about touch always being sexual is kind of like some of the attitudes that people have about ASMR, where it's perceived to be this sexual thing, when indeed it's definitely not, and it's actually something that really helps people. So I just wanted to make that connection. Touch in everyday activities. Touch is the first sense to develop, and it functions even after seeing and hearing begin to fade. Infants and young children are dependent on touch for learning about the world. During the first year of life, everything goes in the mouth and is learned through the mouth's touching. The young child explores the physical world by touch and learns the many facets it can convey, including elasticity. The young child explores the physical world by touch and learns the many facets it can convey, including elasticity, resilience, shape, sharpness, softness, temperature, and texture. Children learn about general hygiene, grooming, and the properties of matter from the sense of touch. They also learn safety and self-preservation, such as how to avoid frostbite, hot stoves, noxious substances, and prickers, and they learn how to write, receiving hand-over assistant and penmanship class. For the same reasons, touch is critical for adults. I will never forget how grateful I was that I could feel our electric blanket when it caught fire one night as our baby daughter was laying beside me and my husband. Touch is also critical for most people's work. Imagine a world of computers without touch, or being a potter, a surgeon, a painter, or a fisherman without touch. The world-renowned cellist Jacqueline Desprez lost all sensation in her hands one night during a concert and had to guide her fingers with her eyes to get through her performance. She subsequently died of multiple sclerosis, a progressive disease that robs its victims, mostly women, of touch. Touch becomes even more critical when the other senses break down. For example, tactile vocoders are being developed for deaf children to hear by touch, and a vibrating tactile language called vibrates is being developed for blind adults to read with their fingertips, as they now do with erased braille dots. In addition to being critical for growth and development, communication and learning, touch also serves as comfort and give reassurance to self-esteem. A child's first emotional bonds are built from physical contact, laying the foundation for further emotional and intellectual development. Despite the many critical and important functions of touch, most children, in our country at least, are socialized at an early age to limit their touching. They are scolded when touching their own body parts and are admonished not to touch the bodies of others, as well as many objects in the environment. By adolescence, they have learned to be cautious about physical intimacy and express themselves by facial expressions and words rather than touch. Curiously, however, as adults, we talk about how, in many personal and sentimental ways, I lost my spot. We say, "Your words have touched me deeply," or "She has a soft touch," or "He was a bit touchy." And such advertising slogans as "Reach out and touch someone," AT&T, or "Touch their todays, reach their tomorrows," Johnson & Johnson, we use the term rather freely. These appealing words are rarely translated into action. Americans, who are among the world's least tactile people, limit their touching to family members and sexual intimates. With this in mind, imagine being alone in a hospital without a family member around to hold your hand. 15 days in a hospital without touch was the reason one patient recently gave for escaping and walking home from a local hospital in his pajamas and hospital wristband. Still worse, imagine being a senior citizen, and particularly an articulate older man, confined to bed rest in a nursing home. Older men are touched even less than older women in nursing homes. Some suggested this happens because men discourage touching. They are not accustomed to being touched by their inferiors, and they consider caregivers their inferiors. Some senior citizens have fared better because they have pets and have been able to give them the fondling and cuddling that they missed from people. In return, these older pet owners had less cardiovascular disease and lived longer than without those pets. Our bodies have 18 square feet of skin, which makes skin our largest sense organ. Because skin cannot shut its eyes or cover its ears, it is in a constant state of readiness to receive messages. It is always on. The first sensory input in life comes from the sense of touch while still in the womb, and touch continues to be the primary means of experiencing the world through infancy and well into childhood, even into aging. Touch across cultures and species. touch, more than any other sense, is universal. It's universal across cultures and other species. Most animals know that touch is critical to life. Rat pups do not survive without their mother rat's tongue-licking touch. Monkeys huddle in a corner when they are touch-deprived. Animals such as the rat and the monkey are dependent on the parent's touch to grow and develop, much like people. On the negative side of touch, mother goats will abandon their young if the baby goat gets touched by another animal or human. Many human cultures know the primary value of touch. In African cultures, for example, people live skin to skin with virtually everyone. They start very early, passing their babies from person to person, no matter their age. Some cultures do more touching than others. For example, the French touch people more than Americans or the British. They're not discreet about their lovemaking. As I recently learned while walking through the Luxembourg Gardens in broad daylight on a Sunday when fathers and children were there in great numbers to sail their boats in a garden swan, a young couple wedged into only one chair were managing to do what an American couple would only do in the dark in a more private place. From the very early age of the preschool years, that is very weird. From the very early age of the preschool years, the French are touched more. According to one of our studies, French mothers observed at McDonald's in Paris touch their preschoolers more than American mothers at McDonald's in Miami do. Also, and possibly related, French children are less aggressive toward the other children on the playground than their American counterparts are. And whereas teachers at McDonald's in Paris touch each other more, our study found that teenagers at McDonald's in Miami touch themselves, like self-hugging and playing with their hair more. The French teenagers are also less aggressive with each other. The laying on hands of hands has a long tradition, extended beyond recorded history, and has been a symbol of power in many cultures. As far back as 1553 BC, the Ebers Papyrus showed the early practice of healing by touch, kind of like healing by ASMR. In ancient Greece, the god of healing was Asclepius. I probably butchered that. Asclepius, son of Apollo, who, according to myth, healed people by simply touching them. In the Greece of Hippocrates' time, around 400 BC, there were hand healers, comparable to today's internists, called chirurgos. This is the origin of the word surgeon. Even through the word chirurgos, use the palm in their fingers rather than surgical methods to heal. One of the most famous Roman healers, Galen, AD 130, used massage as a medical treatment. In all four Gospels of the New Testament, the laying on of hands is a commonplace for children, lepers, and those afflicted with disease. The practice was dropped from the church during the 17th century, but the use of the custom by royalty continued. Almost all the monarchs of France and England exercised the royal touch, using it to treat many diseases. The practice continued into modern times. I don't understand why people haven't picked up on the importance of touch yet. I mean, if people way back were using it to heal diseases and stuff, then why aren't we using it as like a form of therapy? I don't know. In France, as late as 1825, Charles V touched between 120 and 130 people. Wow. The laying on of royal hands was frequently associated with scrofula, which came to be known as the king's evil. In 1712, Samuel Johnson contracted scrofula from his wet nurse. When he was 2 1/2, his mother took him to London, where he was among the 200 people touched by Queen Anne, in his case, without being cured. This queen was the last royal figure in England to perform the healing gesture. In an attempt to determine why the healing touch worked, the 18th century Austrian physician Franz Mesmer conducted some studies in Paris that led him to suggest a magnetic fluid emanating from the body transferred healing energy from one person to another. Mesmer, who sought to treat disease through animal magnetism, subsequently developed mesmerism, mesmerism, a therapeutic application of hypnosis. Why did touch healing fall out of favor? Touch researchers offer several possible reasons, including sexual taboos and the development of drugs and treatment technologies that dramatically changed the field of medicine. In his book, Touching is Healing, Jules Older claims touch has become taboo, and that is the reason it does not appear in medical textbooks or curricula. Older elaborates on this with an example from psychiatry. Carl Menninger, one of the world's renowned psychoanalytic theorists, suggested that analysts should not shake hands with their patients. Indeed, sorry if you can hear that. Indeed, most practitioners do not advocate excessive contact between therapist and patient. However, Menninger did not distinguish between therapeutic, sexual, and aggressive touch. All types of touch seem to be, in his words, the mark of a ruthless criminal. In that light, it is interesting to note that a decade ago, touch was most often associated with sexuality, but today, in our litigious, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, society, it is more associated with criminality and increasingly frequent court cases on sexual harassment and sexual abuse. As Freudian psychoanalysis, which discourages touch, is waning, doctors are becoming more willing to touch their patients. Some medical schools, such as Duke and Harvard, have even included touching as part of their medical school curriculum. Alternative treatments such as massage therapy and acupuncture are also helping to bring touch therapy back to medicine, where since pre-recorded time illegitimately reigned as the primary form of therapy. I think that ASMR therapy should become a thing. The advent of drugs was also a problem that negatively affected touch healing. As Voltaire said, physicians pour drugs, about which they know little, to cure diseases, about which they know less into humans, about whom they know nothing. Drugs can either heighten sensitivity to touch or deaden the sense of touch. Stimulants, including amphetamines, cocaine, and caffeine, increase arousal, as indicated by increased heart rate and blood pressure, alertness, and confidence. They also slow down blood circulation, leaving a person feeling cold and jumpy to the touch. Depressants, including barbiturates, narcotics, and tranquilizers, dull the sense of touch. Muscle relaxants, tranquilizers, and sleep inducers as quaaludes break down inhibitions, but also tend to make people less sensitive to touch, as does alcohol, which can depress the system in its touch sensitivity. The only depressant drug that seems to enhance touch is marijuana. Although heightened sensitivity to touch depends on the person's state of mind before taking the marijuana. Among other environmental negative aspects for touch are cold or muggy weather. Warm baths and water beds, on the other hand, can enhance touch sensitivity. As most critics suggest, the medical profession focuses on treatment rather than prevention. As doctors' training focuses on dealing with the disease, generally through drug therapy, little emphasis is put on maintaining health. As Norman Cousins so succinctly wrote, the physician celebrates computerized tomography. The patient celebrates the outstretched hand. Although touch is an effective healing agent, it is underutilized by healing practitioners, from neurologists to social workers, and has been generally ignored by institutions and neglected by researchers. Jules Older's data suggests that of 100 patients walking into a doctor's office, only 50 will have an identifiable physical ailment. Of this 50, 35 will have a self-limiting disorder, an illness or injury which will get better by itself, with or without the doctor's treatment. Of the other 50 patients who come to the door, these are the ones without evidence of pathology. 5 will be there for administrative reasons, such as an insurance claim or a certificate of disability, and another 10 for preventive measures, vaccination, contraception, diet advice. The remaining 35 seek help with life problems, usually of an emotional nature. Older highlights the point that most patients are seeking contact and a little reassurance that can be helped by a doctor's caring touch. More recently, a 1993 U.S. public health survey estimated that 70 to 80% of Americans who visit conventional physicians suffer from a stress-related disorder. As Dr. Lynn of Carmichael, chairman of the University of Miami Department of Family Medicine, says, "The good doctor is a good groomer." Joan Carmichael, a fellow researcher in that department, concurs, saying, "Laying on of hands is not merely folklore or mysticism. Reinstituting the back rub as standard hospital procedure could balance the introduction of the computerized axial tomography scanner." I really love getting my back rubbed. Sometimes I ask my boyfriend to tickle my back and stuff. I don't know why. It kind of induces ASMR tingles. Older relates an interesting anecdote about an osteopath who has had a habit of playfully pinching an older patient's big toe during his examination. The patient says, "I've been waiting for you to tell you it is because of you. I am still alive." The osteopath says, "What are you talking about?" "Well," says the older man, "every morning you pinched my toe when the others weren't looking." The physician, puzzled, says, "Yes, but what does that have to do with?" The patient interrupts, saying, "Nobody plays with the toes of a dying man, so I decided I must not be dying after all." The doctor's touch let this man know he was still a viable human being. Touch, affecting both tactile and pressure receptors, stimulates the central nervous system into a state of relaxation. Anxiety and stress levels, both behavioral and biochemical, are then reduced, and the general effect is a relaxed, more attentive state. But there are also special effects, such as reduced pain for those with arthritis, increased peak airflow for those with asthma, and increased natural killer cell activity for the HIV patient. The anecdotal and research data on these and many other positive effects of touch, all detailed in these chapters, will serve to remind us just how vital touch is and how it needs to be a greater part of our life. And that is the end of the chapter. I'm just going to bookmark this real quick. So, if you guys would like me to read more of this book, feel free to comment down below, like, subscribe, and I will read the next chapter of it. And if not, if you guys didn't enjoy this type of book, I can definitely find a really good fiction book to read to you guys. As always, I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful morning, night, week,